Terrific. Well, thank you so much, Joe, for agreeing to do this presentation. I have the honor of working with Joe on a regular basis at Snohomish Conservation District. He is our urban agriculture coordinator and just does fabulous work in our community, providing much needed food access and working with farmers, working with food banks, working with all sorts of people in the food system realm. And he's going to share some of his work today about this. And he's also going to talk about a food system communications hub that we're developing and will hopefully launch here very soon. It's almost completed. So Joe, I'm going to let you take it away. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Yeah, that sounds great. And I just wanted to say that Nora's presentation was actually a perfect segue into what I'm going to talk about. We will get into some details related to what Nora was saying, including some collaborative funding opportunities that we're working on within the district and some of our partners within the local food system. So again, thank you everyone for joining. My name is Joe Crumbley. Again, I'm the Urban Agriculture Program Coordinator here at the Snohomish Conservation District. I'm going to talk to you today primarily about our Food Systems Communications Hub and how it's addressing gaps in service around local food security efforts in the county. Some of the items that we'll be going through today on our agenda include addressing gaps, why we're doing that, some definitions, data and underserved communities, ranking matrix resources that we use, collaboration with stakeholders, and current SCD programs which are affecting change. So as you can see here, the percentage of folks facing low food access in Snohomish County is actually higher than the percent of those facing food insecurity in Snohomish County. Low food access in urban areas is around 1 mile from the nearest grocery store, and it's defined in rural areas as around 10 miles away from the nearest grocery store or food source. Many food system stakeholders involved in this food systems communication hub that I'm going to be expanding upon have led similar or have been active in leading similar efforts in the past, led by groups such as Providence, as well as some efforts done through the Verdant Health Commission. So a report that's been put out by the Verdant Health Commission on focus groups with food bank consumers assess the need of food bank recipients in the county to find gaps in service that needed addressing. So their findings included some of the following: a desire to have a nutritionist or dietitian, as well as someone who can provide general health care on site at food banks, increased access to someone who can make referrals to social services and essential needs programs, a provision of nutritional information along with recipes and cooking demonstrations to show how to prepare the food available. Some more findings included support for those feeling anxious at the food banks, as well as recognition of the stigma that many face by utilizing the food bank. And also fewer sweet and starchy items that are staples at the food bank or food security organizations. And culturally appropriate vegetables, fruits, and high protein items. So culturally appropriate foods are something that I'm going to expand upon a little more as we progress throughout this presentation. Key food system stakeholders were brought into the Food Systems Communications Hub that we're working on currently, in part to build off of the previous discoveries and momentum that the Verdant Health Commission and Providence had gained traction on. Each member of this growing group has a specialty which addresses one of these food bank recipients' gaps in service, whether it's access to social services at food banks, nutrition, education through CMAR, early childhood development, access programs, reducing stigma through discrete totes to go or backpack programs through the nonprofit partner Hungry Hearts or the YMCA that we both work with, interactive cooking classes with Washington State University SNAP Education, or gleaning nutritious food for food security programs from farmers in the county. All these folks who are members of this ongoing group we're putting together help address these concerns brought up by food bank recipients. In other words, members of this group consist of key stakeholders in the food system sector, primarily within food access, food production, food policy, education, and public health. So around 40% of the food produced in the US never gets eaten. I'll get into why this matters now, and along with distance from food being an issue for food access and food security, so is food waste. SCD and our community partners address this through gleaning on farms and occasionally farmers markets. We're also looking to help farmers find suitable markets for their products, while also promoting where to find them on our website for consumers. Food waste affects food security as well as of environmental outcomes. A lot of what I do day to day tries to balance food security and natural resource conservation. And of course, you can imagine there's a lot of overlap with those two fields. So surprisingly, if food waste were a country, it would actually be the third largest carbon polluter, and around of all food produced around the world ends up in a landfill. So we do have a lot of room for growth in that arena. That being said, we'll also need to make more efficient use of the food currently produced, while also increasing production by 50% by the year 2050 in order to meet the projected needs of the growing world population. This is important because increased production does not always correlate with equitable distribution. That's something that I'm going to continue to touch on throughout this presentation, is equitable distribution. So this can be seen historically in examples such as the 1960s Green Revolution in India, where new advances led to increased production. However, the majority of this food was exported to Western countries and away from the producers. This disparity can be seen in farming communities across the US, where food producing regions are not necessarily food secure. Some examples of this, I mean, there's numerous examples, but some include Bakersfield, California, the rural South, and of course, even parts of our own Snohomish County. So getting into defining some of the root causes of food insecurity, for more context, the World Health Organization defines food insecurity by three main aspects: utilization, availability, and access. So some issues that can affect food insecurity can include language and immigration barriers, poverty and food deserts, unaffordable housing, lack of nutrition education, no culturally relevant food, access to hunger relief, such as SNAP or food stamps or food banks. And of course, as I read through some of these issues that affect food insecurity, you might notice that a lot of them are correlating with the responses that the Verdant Health Commission had received from their assessment with food bank recipients. So even within food security programs, without embracing food sovereignty or culturally appropriate foods, barriers can still come up that prevent access. One example of this can be found in the rollout of the federal food box program, where they included meat and dairy in the same box, which is not culturally appropriate for kosher or halal practices. So really knowing the audience that you're serving can greatly increase engagement. Here are some definitions of both food insecurity and low food access. As mentioned previously, increasing access to locally sourced food is one important component to addressing food insecurity. This should be accompanied by equitable distribution, of course. So here are some useful definitions, like I said, to food insecurity and food access for more context. And as you notice reading this low food access definition, it is interesting to note how stores in low food access areas often have more expensive groceries. So this can be resulting from a number of factors, including supply and demand. But as you can imagine, this can result in increasing food insecurity. So now I'll get into the importance of data on underserved communities for food security programs. When SCD and our partners prioritize resources for underserved regions, the tools we use take into account census data. This can include data from the decennial census, the American Community Survey, the Census Bureau's Household Pulse Survey. And this data acquired from these surveys take into account population, aspects of social, economic, housing, and demographic information. Some examples within these individual categories can include, within the social category, things like disabilities or language. Language is definitely an important one that we'll get into in more detail in a moment on how we provide outreach materials. It can include, under the economic category, employment, commute to work, income, occupation, and poverty status. Under housing category, this can include the number of occupants per room, rent, whether you're an owner or a renter, available vehicles, and home value. I will say a quick note, a lot of what I do is set up community garden spaces, and a lot of the underserved folks in Snohomish County may not have access to their own yard or be individual homeowners. And so some of the ways that we can adapt by looking at some of this census data is looking in a most underserved region, how many folks are homeowners, and that might adjust how we would do a community garden installation. Maybe instead of supplying raised garden beds, we might instead supply balcony hanging planter boxes for folks to grow vegetables that have shallow root systems at an apartment complex instead of their own home. But to continue, under housing, I mentioned rent's a category, available vehicles, and also home value. Under the demographics subcategory, some examples of what this assesses include total population, age, household population, race, including whether it's a Hispanic or Latino origin. So of course, a lot of what myself within the Snohomish Conservation District or many of our community partners are looking to do in this group is reduce gaps in service around food insecurity. SCD and our food system stakeholders find where food insecurity is an issue. We look at root causes and we examine solutions. This picture is just one of many that we have from our project sites, which we distribute resources to in order to combat food insecurity in a food desert region. This is an area in particular in South Everett, where information we've gathered from census data has led to multiple community garden installations and extensive resource distribution from SCD and some of our partners in this communications food hub. Here we've established vegetable gardens at apartment complexes in South Everett after looking at census data. This includes a Boys and Girls Club, an ECAP program, or again, Early Childhood Education and Assistance Program, a CMAR Community Health Center that actually primarily serves Latino audiences. So of course, again, looking at the census data and how we formulate our outreach materials depending on the primary language that might be spoken. We've also worked with Volunteers of America, and they have also recognized the need in this specific region and recently established a pop-up food bank. They've also established a weekly hot meals program in this region out of the same ECAP center that we're showing here, where we were helping with their garden space. And so not to get too far into what ECAP centers do, basically they're mandated federally to provide nutritional assistance and meals for some of the families that are enrolled at their location. And so they also work with community food security, and the VOA has decided to provide weekly hot meals out of that same site, which is wonderful. So we've used in this context something that I'm going to get into in more detail in just a moment, but what's called the USDA Food Access Research Atlas, as well as the Washington State Department of Health Environmental Health Disparities Map, which of course assists our outreach abilities in this area. Now I'm going to get into some of these websites that I went into, that I got into in just a moment ago. The CDC Social Vulnerability Index, the Washington State Department of Health Environmental Health Disparities Map. This one is one of my favorites. It really gets into, languages, cultural needs, socioeconomic status, food desert aspects, many things that are very helpful in how we prioritize our project sites and resource distribution. We also have the USDA website, which shows the high rate areas of students on free and reduced lunch, including the summer lunch program, before and after school meals, CACFP meals, which are what are served out of these ECAP sites. And then we also have a really informative one if you're interested in looking at food desert regions, which is the USDA Food Access Research Atlas. And so that one not only looks at low income, but also low access, and combines the two and sees how dense populations in counties can be affected by lack of access to grocery stores. Again, in urban areas, that's going to be around a mile away, and in rural areas, that's going to be around 10 miles away. So these mapping tools are very useful for SCD and our partners to identify the most underserved regions. After gathering information from these tools, SCD can compile a list of businesses, organizations, and residents that fall within these regions to narrow down project sites, and partners useful in providing education and outreach, project installation, or collaborative funding opportunities through grants. That's one thing that I know Nora touched on just as her presentation was ending, and that's something we're really looking to expand on this website that we're creating through this communications food hub, is collaborative funding opportunities, so we can all bring up our partnering organizations together to achieve similar underlying goals in addressing food insecurity. Again, data from these sites can include things like primary languages spoken other than English, which benefit our education and outreach materials. And then, of course, increases engagement when you do that with your target audience. As a state agency, we're not allowed to look at individual information like this, but instead we can take a larger step back and look at this information regionally, and then we can choose to focus and prioritize resources and project sites based on regions. Now I'm going to get into some free food available and how we're going to eventually have this available on our website for the public. Some of our partners, of course, include the YMCA, nonprofits such as Hungry Hearts, located near our offices in Lake Stevens, and as I mentioned before, ECAP sites or early childhood education programs. And so those are all great for connecting us with school meals, free school meals for children, specifically youth on the free and reduced lunch program. So the YMCA and Hungry Hearts, they both operate school backpack programs and Totes to Go programs, which provide portable food for students on the free and reduced lunch program. Going back briefly to some of the responses that the Verdant Health Commission received, one of which was having more discreet and empathetic perspectives when it comes to food bank recipients. You know, you don't want to see a food bank that has a line out the door where folks are visible for passersby to see. You know, it's something that people are sensitive about, and you don't want to broadcast that you're looking for these services, or many folks feel that way. And so you want to be respectful of that. And that's why when organizations like Hungry Hearts and the YMCA provide these discrete meals for students and on the free and reduced lunch program, they really are respectful of that feedback. So these partners also receive gleaned fruit and produce from Snohomish Conservation District when we have active gleaning going on. SCD also establishes vegetable gardens for many ECAP sites, some of which, as I mentioned, also operate hot meal programs for the community. Through collaboration with partners like the Snohomish Food Bank Coalition, which is kind of an umbrella organization for all of the, or most of the food banks in Snohomish County. We also work with Washington State University SNAP Education, and through these kinds of partners, SCD has access to maps like you see here, which we can provide to the public, and they emphasize free food available in the county. You know, when we have active gleaning going on, we work with around 20 different food banks, and all of them are able to not only take gleaned fruit and produce that we do at local farms, but also gleaned fruit and produce that individual homeowners are able to donate to these food banks. And so we make sure that they are able to accommodate what the public and my specific programs provide. So this is, of course, part of the asset mapping tool that we're working on with Forterra and other food system stakeholders. One of the many exciting projects we have going on currently is a community garden installation for a YMCA location, which also serves as a Totes to Go distribution center. School counselors come here to pick up discrete and portable meals for students on the free and reduced lunch program. Once the vegetable garden we will install is going to be producing, the vegetables grown on site can also be added to these meals. One element mentioned, which affects food access and food security, of course, is the distance you are away from the food available. So anytime that we can implement a food producing garden on site or near where it is served, it's definitely ideal, and it's an added benefit and more efficiently combats food security. Of course, anytime you can eliminate the middleman of distribution, you're going to have a more efficient system. So collaboration across our regional food system stakeholders. Our collaboration with regional food system stakeholders includes sharing resources and cross-promotion of events to raise awareness and increase effectiveness of existing programs. This is added to the scope and scale of the Food Box program, the Federal Food Box program, which many of you have probably heard of, which was initiated during the time of COVID when it was at its peak. And so some of our partners have actually, through cross-promotion from this group, have been able to increase their food box scope and scale by nearly double. We've acquired grant funding together and even created new partnerships among participating organizations of this group. One example includes the integration of one of our partners, Farmer Frog, and another partner, Seed to Fork Farm, in the city of Snohomish within Snohomish County. They've come together to create a new food box distribution site in process, and also a community garden space which will support local residents facing food insecurity. SCD helps connect organizations like this to increase the community impact, and it provides resources to increase their food production. So SCD, of course, helps with growing food for these communities as well. Some materials that we provide include vegetable seeds, starts, compost bins, raised garden beds, and soil amendments. We also provide technical assistance, how-to videos, and financial assistance through our rebate program to the most underserved regions. In 2019, SCD's programs helped raise over 70,000 pounds of locally sourced fruit and produce to food banks in Snohomish County. And in 2020, because our gleaning was not able to continue due to COVID-19, we adapted and increased our capacity for community garden installations and installed over 100 raised garden beds. So although our gleaning has not yet resumed, our resource distribution is now on track to have another fruitful and productive year. In all of our community garden installations and urban agricultural resource distribution, we use these websites and census data to rank priority project sites. This picture here below is of a community garden space we've established in partnership with a garden club to grow food for food banks. The yard sign shown here in the upper right is designed by local middle school art classes and was used as a reward to incentivize individual homeowners who donate over 30 pounds of fruit and produce they grow to food banks. So in this food systems communication hub that we're developing, which includes the website that I'll get into in a moment, an intended outcome of the food systems communication hub is to increase efficient communication of needs between organization to organization, as well as organization and the public, and so specifically food systems organizations and the public. This will help the food insecure know where to find fresh food, help volunteers glean food, find food banks to store it, and acquire delivery drivers to distribute it. Even in the time of COVID-19, when it prevented us from being able to directly lead large-scale gleaning events at nearby farms, we were still in direct communication with food bank managers and farms which had excess fruit and produce they weren't able to bring to market. In this instance, I would contact food banks with distribution vehicles, and the farms would often still be able to allow the food banks to load their trucks using essential workers. This ability to adapt and reach key food system stakeholders efficiently will of course be expanded upon by our food systems communication hub project. That's one of our many underlying goals of implementing this. So food provider needs and resources. This is something we'll address on our website. And food banks can, of course, have a surplus of specific perishable items and could benefit from knowing where to store it before it expires. To give you an example, sometimes in 2019, when I had large-scale gleaning events, and we would have thousands and thousands of pounds of sweet corn or potatoes, for an example, even though I have around 20 different food banks I can call up, sometimes it would take 10 to 15 phone calls to find a food bank that actually had the storage capacity, didn't have, they may not have adequate refrigeration available at the time, or they also might have a surplus of that individual food item at that time as well, since of course fruit and vegetable varieties on this western side of the state will become ready for the most part all at once. And so you can imagine food banks get bombarded with a lot of similar items all at one time. And so they really want to know quickly how to allocate it elsewhere before it expires. Our food system stakeholders have previously shared resources like commercial fridges with one another, sinks and preparation areas for the food preparation when it's brought from the farm. Of course, it needs to be washed and prepared before giving to the public. And they've also been able to share delivery vehicles. I know that in the recent past, there was a theft of a vehicle from one food bank, and the other food bank stepped in and allowed them to use theirs. And so it's a really great kind of symbiotic, cohesive relationship we're developing across the food system sector, and specifically within food security. So what are our strategic planning within these partnering organizations within the food system working towards? Well, our strategic planning is specifically working to address a lack of communication in the local food system to specifically meet the needs of people working in this field, compiling helpful resources for those who are providing the food that will make this system work, such as I mentioned, storage, how to donate excess locally sourced food, excess refrigeration, volunteers that can be used for gleaning, working in the food banks themselves, the very long list of how volunteers can be utilized, especially since there's a big shortage right now after COVID had reduced capacity. And then again, available space to grow food. Some other considerations include procuring the resources needed for people who find food. such as locations to find available food on farms, resources to help grow your own food for individual homeowners who are facing food insecurity. And so working with Forterra, Washington Farmland Trust, and many influential community partners in the local food system, we will address gaps in service to serve those in need, reduce the root causes of food security. That's what we're working towards. And lastly, so even again, when my programs are not able to directly acquire food that is available for distribution for food security programs and food banks, I can usually contact other partnering organizations that can make use of that service or that resource. I mentioned connecting food banks to farms. However, we also connect a local nonprofit with individual homeowners who have access fruit and produce in their yard as well. I know that Pierce Conservation District has a great program where they work with volunteers and volunteer managers to harvest fruit from nearby yards. And that's something that I really was excited about and wanting to learn more after years ago, seeing their presentation at Wade and talking with them. And since then, I've met up with an organization, Hungry Hearts, in this community, and they have, like I said, a food bank not too far from our office in Lake Stevens. And if there's a individual homeowner who has excess fruit in their yard, I'll go ahead and let Hungry Hearts know. They have a group of about 90 different volunteers that are consistently able to go out and harvest for their standalone food bank. And oftentimes they'll be able to include fruit or produce harvested in their school backpack programs, which again are very similar to the Totes to Go programs that the YMCA provides for students on free and reduced lunches. So it's really great not only to be directly involved in, let's say, gleaning or providing resources to the community that can help address food security needs, but also a lot of what I do is a community connector role where I see a need, a gap in service. I think to myself, hey, what kind of partnering organization do I know within this food systems communications hub that can potentially fill that need? And so a lot of times, you know, we may be short-staffed in certain areas, or we are looking for new funding opportunities, or we may have resources that we're looking to develop further, and it may be more beneficial to solve the problem or the gap in service by reaching out to one of our community partners and connecting them and making more efficient use of resources currently available, and going back to that old saying of not reinventing the wheel if something's already out there. So here is a picture of our Communications Food Hub website. This is something that we're currently working on, and as Linda said, we're really excited to eventually roll this out for public use. We also are working with something that's going hand in hand with this website, our asset mapping tool. We're working with Forterra, some of which may be able to be shown on this Communications Food Hub website. And so again, this is a collaborative process that is resulting from collaboration with regional food system stakeholders. We have many categories on this website. I can't click on it quite yet because it's in process, but this is just showing you a screenshot of what it looks like now. And as you can imagine, if you click on any of these 8 pictures below, we're gonna have subcategories with more details. And so this is going to, again, expand upon quick and efficient communication between farmers, food banks, and organizations working in the food systems sector, while also providing important information for food bank recipients and useful insight for consumers looking to purchase from local farms. Wet my lips here a little bit. So within growing local markets section up on the upper left, excuse me, we provide resources for the public to find farms near them, as well as farmers markets, farm stands, online sales, delivery, and much more. I have focused a fair amount today on food security, but we can't forget the importance of supporting our local farmers. As Snohomish County is one of the fastest growing counties in the region, or in the state, and let alone probably up there in the entire US, you can imagine that the increasing encroachment on farmland by housing developments is making the farmers more wary of being able to grow the food and be able to provide for their own families and continue their fruitful enterprises. And so we really want to respect that and support them as much as we can, which is why we really focus not only on food security, but also natural resource conservation and supporting existing agriculture within the county. So we really try and advertise their products on our website, and we'll be excited to show you in months to come once we can eventually roll this out. Don't have an exact deadline yet, but that's something we're very excited about. This website will not be able to be updated externally, but with all of our existing partners, we'll be in direct communication on any information they would like replaced over time with updated content, or we will also be able to provide external links as well to partnering organizations. Some of the Farm Finder resources that we'll provide in this growing local markets section are currently going to be derived from the WSDA, as well as partners like Snow Valley Tilth, among others. In the ways to contribute section, we will allow the public to donate money or resources to partnering organizations, as well as food. They can also donate their time as a volunteer, working for the East to West Food Rescue, which I know I didn't touch on too much yet. That's basically, I'm sure a lot of you folks attending today will have heard of that. When there's an excess of, let's say, potatoes and onions in the eastern side of the state, a lot of that was distributed over to the western side where it could be put to good use in food banks. And one of the partnering organizations involved in our communications food hub is both Farmer Frog and Seed to Fork, which are both great distributors for those excess potatoes and onions throughout 2020. They've both primarily, Farmer Frog has distributed tens of thousands of pounds of potatoes and onions. I think they actually have reached over 100,000 pounds. So really inspiring to see the work that they've been doing. So after joining the Food Systems Communications Hub, one of our partners increased the families they served with their food box program starting from around 270 families to now over 900 families. And this was done solely through cross promotion between Snohomish Conservation District. And so we really expect that this kind of cross promotion and benefit of this collaborative kind of symbiotic relationship between our partnering organizations is only expected to increase as we roll out this website, increasing our cross promotion capabilities. Additionally, we will provide ways for urban residents and rural farmers to offer their land for gleaning through this page. For urban homeowners, we have contacts where they can volunteer. They can volunteer their time gleaning. We can also connect them with organizations like the one I mentioned, Hungry Hearts, who can go out and send their volunteers to glean fruit and produce from individual homeowners and support local school backpack programs and totes to go programs. In the growing food section here off to the right, SCD and the Food System Communications Hub provides resources on starting community gardens, list of community gardens in the county, and links to apply for resources for growing your own food. So one thing I didn't get into too much today, but I can just touch on briefly, is the Snohomish Conservation District, through one of my urban agriculture programs, Lawns to Lettuce, has a cost share where homeowners and organizations can apply for a $500 rebate that can go towards implementing a community garden space at their location. This is, of course, voted on by myself and peers, and we apply our ranking matrix tools using those websites I discussed to prioritize all the applicants and see who has the highest need, basically. So other than that, the links to apply for resources for growing your own food, we also list places nearby, like the local Red Barn Community Farm in South Everett, owned by the Volunteers of America. We plan on having them on this website as well, where folks can purchase yearly plots to grow food for their families, and that will then in turn fund the Volunteers of America Food Bank Distribution Center. So the more plots that we can help them sell to the public on a yearly basis, the more food banks will actually benefit. I know that there's a handful of food banks that benefit from the Volunteers of America Food Bank Distribution Center. So that's just giving you an idea of the kind of collaboration we're looking towards on this website. Additionally, we provide resources on this growing food page for school garden safety, guidelines for starting school gardens, as well as translated growing and harvesting instructions for 12 commonly grown vegetable varieties. This was created in partnership with the Farmer Frog farm that we work with, as well as another farm a little south of us in Carnation called Oxbow Farm. So it just goes to show all these different resources. I would not nearly have as much at my disposal without creating these partnerships. That's one of the great strength of the Conservation District is connecting folks with these kinds of resources. Moving right along, the free food available on the bottom left here, this page, once it's a clickable link, will allow the public to see lists of resources for over 20 local food banks, many weekly hot meal programs, nutrition programs, free school meal programs that I touched on briefly, many of which are found on a clickable and scrollable map page where you can see their hours of operation, address, contact information, and so on. Ideally, what we're intending in the future as well is on this website to be able to show, once our gleaning events are up and running again, which food banks were able to receive some of that donated fruit and produce, and then the public can know where to go to ideally be able to have some of that to bring home, whether it's, you know, in the past we've gleaned sweet corn, potatoes, blueberries, all kinds of different varieties, and it's nice to be able to show the public where it's gone if they are food bank recipients, so they can take some of that home if they so choose. This link will also show laws and regulations, frequently asked questions, and links where folks can apply for SNAP and WIC benefits. As mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, one of the major responses that was received from the Verdant Health Commission of food bank recipients was knowing where and how to efficiently sign up for those kinds of resources. Mentioning the Verdant Health Commission responses, another thing was learning about nutrition education. It was also learning more about dietary needs. And although the Conservation District can't directly touch on that, that's not really what we do. We do have partners in collaboration with CMAR Community Health Centers and some Providence locations, which also deal with patients facing dietary-related health conditions. So we were previously able to grant nurse access to some of our previous website pages that had shown where food banks had received gleaned food. And these nurses would then show, nurses and health educators would show that were employed by these facilities would show their patients that were facing dietary related health conditions useful resources on where to find this fresh, locally sourced fruit and produce from these gleaning events that we would conduct. Under the Protecting Farming and Farmland link here, we will eventually have resources on farm planning for folks who want to start, related newsletters, educational background on the work our partners are doing, and ways the local food system stakeholders for our partners can apply for grants collaboratively. So that's definitely something we're really excited about, is collaborative funding opportunities. Volunteers in this section will also have access to relevant articles, videos, documents on best management practices, and can register for the Cultivating Success workshops for beginner farmers. Moving right along, the educational opportunities section, that I apologize is blocked by this black bar there. This section will be one where there's another area for cross promotion, including educational resources from Washington State University SNAP Education, the Brightwater Education Center, where we have numerous presentations myself and others within the Conservation District have done on urban agricultural practices, the Cattlemen's Winter School, Cultivating Success workshops, and Focus on Farming. Our culturally relevant food section, which is right here, oh, there it is, focuses on food sovereignty, and will eventually be able to provide the public with historical context of POC farmers in the county, and examples of community garden spaces that the Snohomish Conservation District has connections to or has helped implement, which emphasize this practice. I know one of them includes a Linwood Church, which is a multicultural church, and we helped establish a garden space there where they actually serve weekly hot meals and food bank, the food bank through their church for their congregation in the surrounding community. And they've actually assessed the cultural food needs of their congregation, which has then in turn helped determine what they had chose to grow. So this is all really relevant moving forward. I know there's a lot of momentum on food sovereignty right now, and it's just a really important topic. So I'm really excited to emphasize that on our website, and that practice on our website, allowing culturally diverse members of the community to have a say in what is actually grown and implemented. Moving right along, I wanted to talk very briefly about current Snohomish Conservation District programs affecting these kinds of changes in the field, or in this field of food sovereignty, food security, natural resource conservation. And so one of them is Project Harvest. This is one where we work closely with the Volunteers of America to allocate fruit and produce gleaned from nearby farms, doing large-scale gleaning events to their food bank distribution center, where they can send it out to different food banks all across the county. The Plant to Row program, we can provide vegetable seeds and various resources, but primarily seeds to individual homeowners in the county, or residents who would like to grow food, as long as they promise to donate at least one row of what they grow to nearby food banks. And then, of course, the Lawns to Lettuce program, which I mentioned briefly, is able to, once folks can apply and are accepted, they're able to have up to a $500 rebate for creating a community garden space to grow food for food insecure regions. One thing that's really great is finding locations like a food bank, or maybe a faith-based organization that already has a food security element to them. And then if you can install the community garden space directly at their site, you again eliminate that aspect of distribution and just go right to the source. So moving right along here, our funders for this project include the Washington State Conservation Commission and a grant through them, as well as the Community Foundation of Snohomish County is supporting us as well. If I were to include all of our many partners on this project, I wouldn't have enough room on this page, but here are some of the main ones that we are working with on this food system communication hub project, and we're really excited to roll this out in the somewhat near future. Some of the main partners include the Volunteers of America, food banks within the Snohomish County Food Bank Coalition, of course, Washington State University SNAP Education, which is able to provide educational cooking demonstrations that are very collaborative at food banks, at some of our ECAP sites or other project sites. Forterra, again, is the one that is primarily helping us with this asset mapping tool. And Washington Farmland Trust is another leader in this collaborative process. So really excited to have these very impactful partners within the local food system. I wanted to now break into what time we have left to go into some questions. Let's see here.
Perfect. Thank you, Joe. Stephanie's going to be moderating some questions for you.
Oh, great.
Hi, Joe. Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a really wonderful presentation. I enjoyed that a lot. We had a question come in from David Jackson, and he asks, can you talk a little bit about how the relationship building that goes into creating a network like this? Does this help understand their needs and capacity for the food hub?
Sure. So a lot of, I guess the starting point, when I first got into this position, I didn't really know much about these different organizations in Snohomish County. And I think one thing that really helped initially was the word of mouth and folks hearing about some of our programs and wanting to get involved. But since then, we've just gained traction and momentum. And I think some of the big elements that really helped spread awareness of our programs and wanting more partners to participate in these collaborative opportunities included myself and others going to like meetings with the Snohomish Food Bank Coalition and talking to them, talking to various groups within Snohomish County, whether it's 350 Everett group, talking to them about climate change and local food security. There's really a long list of just basically outreach efforts that were precursors to gaining all of these community partners. And so it's a tricky question to answer because it takes time. There's no real easy answer on how to gain all of these community partners. It just takes time on going out into the community. I'm in it's a little over 2.5 years since I've worked here. And I would say there's just a handful of partners in the very beginning of my position. And so a lot of my first year here included outreach efforts, tabling at events, going to farmers markets and tabling, just kind of promoting our programs and waiting to hear back from folks. And so a lot of it just takes, boots on the ground, going out into the community and talking about the programs and hoping that there's some responses. David, does that kind of answer the question a little bit?
David, you can either write your comment in the questions box or we can unmute you.
David's hand is raised and I've unmuted you, so you should be good to go to unmute yourself.
Yes, it does. I'm sorry, my chat box disappeared. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And then Kelsey wrote up a few questions while you were speaking as well, and she asks, has your work at Snohomish CD looked into how and if the Growth Management Act may not be addressing food security through county zoning/land use code updates? And then there's a follow-up, which is, are your municipal and county partners involved at looking into the connections between current code adoption for land use/housing and how that plays into food insecurity?
I think that actually is a little above my level here. I'm not familiar with that act. Can you actually expand upon what that is, and maybe I can address that further? I'm not quite aware of what that act is.
Yeah, so I guess what prompted that question, Joe, and for some reason all of a sudden you're backlit.
I don't know.
Oh no, all of a sudden I can see your beautiful scenery behind you. No worries. That's not too big of a deal. We can still hear you.
Sure.
My question around that, and this is something I've been thinking about as a planner and who does outreach here, is, the Growth Management Act is something all of our counties in Washington have to have code updates around land use and zoning. And I'm just thinking about the connections between zoning codes and affordable housing and how that is all connected with like food security, and I wasn't sure if you were knowledgeable at all about any efforts, I guess, on the state's level with adopting some of those kind of addressing that within the GMA, or if your county has specific, things through your work that you guys have talked about exploring.
I think I can help answer this. I work closely with Joe on this, and I'm helping to lead our food systems work and strategic planning in partnership with Forterra. And Forterra just recently, as part of this work, just recently completed a policy analysis. So that's something we're going to be digging into, looking at for any future work that we're doing. So we are looking at that. So good question, Kelsey. But we don't have any plan of action yet.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
We've probably got enough time for just one more question.
Perfect. Since I am not seeing more in the questions box, Kelsey had another question, which is the Puget Sound Food Hub involved in this effort? And do you see Snohomish CD continuing to house this well into the future, or are you envisioning this transforming into ownership by other organizations?
That's a great question. To my knowledge, the Puget Sound Food Hub is not directly involved. I have worked with them in previous positions, and I know they do great work. I don't think that they're directly involved at this time. We're more than welcome. We're really open to expanding our partners, and so that's maybe room for growth is bringing folks like them in. I think primarily we're looking for partners within this region specifically. But we do occasionally have grants that allow us to work outside our county. And so that's something that we can definitely keep in mind. I know that that they're doing great work, and we're more than happy to expand our collaborative opportunities with local partners in this food system. As far as long-term goals for who is running this food systems communication hub, I think that it's kind of in its early stages, and I don't have the foresight to know that specifically. Linda, do you want to touch on that?
Well, yes, and I do want to add that we do have a representative from the Puget Sound Food Hub on our strategic planning committee. So they are engaged in that way. And as far as the continuation of the communications hub, we will continue to host it on our website, but we also have a lot of partners that are contributing to that. And one of our primary partners on this is Forterra. So we're continuing this work with Forterra in many different ways, and also with Snohomish County.
Fabulous. Thank you. I'm always filled with questions. Joe, thank you so much for your time today and for sharing a wealth of knowledge. In case y'all didn't see some of those great resources that he was sharing, I put some hyperlinks in the chat that should have gone out to you. But obviously, Joe, it sounds like you're available for questions after the fact, and you can reach out to him. So thank you again.
Thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.